Garcia and Ponda Monsepo Dezejo, Joel Burvell, and Deontay Colquitt. That was more than a mouthful. And by heart, because there's no name patches. So we're going to start right from the beginning. What does success look like in diverse clinical trial recruitment and retention? Deontay?
Success looks like more numbers for the diverse groups that need to be involved. It means that when that particular patient in a clinical trial goes to a site that they see a person that looks like them, that maybe they've been offered transportation that will support them coming to and participating in a clinical trial. And we've talked about a lot of women today. And if it is a woman that sometimes women, Black women or brown, they can't come because they don't have childcare. So maybe that also means offering that particular type of offering for someone to join a clinical trial.
Anybody else want to take that question?
Yeah, I'd love to weigh in on. So when we talk about success, I often think about like, what is the measure against which you're measuring the success? And so when you put it into the context of a pharmaceutical or a biotech company, for me, the clinical trial should be representative of the true epidemiology of whatever disease state whatever disease state that your company is looking to treat. And I say true epidemiology because as we heard in the first panel, there is systemic, the ways in which the systems have been built across clinical trials, across scientific research, across the medical industry. You have these systems built which are going to yield racist outcomes. And if that's the case, that means that the research that has been done to date on disease states that these companies are looking to treat are missing individuals who are not a part of your populations. So therefore, if you're going to be building these treatments now, you're not going to account for those individuals who are not even thought of in the first place as a part of the research. So therefore, you need to start with that root cause, reassess what the epidemiology is, reassess who's been missing from that population, and then set your success measures in what clinical trials should look like. It's not to say that you have to do one before the other, but you need to do both in tandem.
And before I was even chosen for this, I don't think she even knew, I've actually participated in clinical trials, several with asthma, and on the south side of Chicago. So I was glad that I could be a part because obviously asthma and location too. So yeah. What has been the impact of the recent FDA guidance on diverse clinical trial recruitment? Joel?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll first of all give a little introduction about who I am. My name is Joel. I'm a medical student, fourth year medical student, but I'm better known online as a medical mythbuster for creating content on TikTok and Instagram of all places about health equity. So that's breaking down what does health equity look like, why does it exist, what do we need, where do we need to go from here to get patients to better understand their health so that when they work with their physicians, there's a common language. Mm-hmm. I think when we think about the FDA guidelines of increasing diversity in clinical trials, it's not just about diversity within the trials, but who's actually putting on those trials. Mm-hmm. As a student, I'm always thinking about what are the opportunities that got me where I am here today. There were so many programs that invested in me that let me know that I could be a doctor. And there need to be more programs like that for clinical trial investigators too, to make sure that young people of color know that they're needed, that their voices are needed in their communities, because they're often seeing disease states or things that are happening to their family members that other people aren't recognizing. And so I think the more diverse workforce that we have, that's what's so significant about the FDA guidelines, is making sure that we have a diverse workforce, making sure that the cohorts of people that are within these actual trials are diverse as well, will overall make sure that we're reaching communities that have often been overlooked in history.
And I know, Ponda, you guys are doing a lot in Amgen around this.
Absolutely, we are. But before I answer that, I did want to weigh in on the success story.
Okay.
I think that the one thing we should highlight is success also means days like this, when people who care and who are passionate about this topic take the time to sit and talk about it, right? I think we shouldn't underestimate the ability for us to get together and spend a day and really thrash through this issue that we know is so important and so topical. So a day like this is successful for me as well, a sign of success. So yeah, getting back to the FDA guidelines. Look, I think the FDA guidelines are very well welcomed, and I think we should acknowledge the boldness and the importance of these guidelines having been updated. You know, yes, they're guidelines, but we know that there's hopefully intent to make these more legislative. When I think about us from an Amgen perspective, what have we done? Well, we've been on this journey since about 2020. We created a team that actually was born out of an employee resource group called ABEN, which stands for Amgen Black Employee Network. And these were just like-minded people, very organically thinking about what is really important in our healthcare ecosystem and what is missing. And these teams got together, like in 2020, like-minded. Eventually, we got to a situation where we were able to speak to our CEO, our leadership, and our executive vice president for research and say, hey, this is something that needs to be tackled, right? This is important. And we got that, what we call a sponsorship spine. So we were able to create a dedicated team. And the team is called RISE, which stands for Representation in Clinical Research, of which I lead. But I think by the time the FDA guidelines came through, we were ready. We were really ready. We had the right mindset, we had the right team members, but more importantly, we knew which programs and how we wanted to address the diversity action plan. So, I think that the guidelines, it might be a little bit too soon to say what is the impact, but I can say that definitely it is asking and forcing pharma, biotech to really put up a mirror and be more intentional and accountable about addressing the clinical trial or lack of clinical trial diversity.
Anybody else want to chime in on that?
I actually would like to answer that question as well. I work for Matthews Media Group, and we are an agency under Omnicom Health Group, and we help biotech and pharma really look for patients within all types of indications. And what we've seen with this since the last couple of years is that there's been a rise in questioning on how are we working with a diverse organizations or diverse populations in the community. So what I see the guidelines coming up with is that people are actually starting to ask questions on how can we recruit this group of people, but what's the magic? It's not even magic, but what's the essential things that we need and the tools that we need for clinical trial recruitment in our diverse areas actually globally.
If I can add one more point to that, one of the things that I work for Blueprint Medicines, what the FDA guidance has done for us is not only has it had, adding on to what y'all have said, it's made us question who's been missing from our clinical trials, what's been keeping them out of the conversation, like what's the epidemiology, what's missing there. But it's also helping us question, once you get to the commercial phase and you're marketing your product, who's missing from that angle? Like which physicians are you going to, which hospitals are you moving into, which community clinics are you working with? And how do you, answering the basic question of, can we now ethically say that we are ensuring that this product is safe and efficacious in the same population as which we're going to market this into? Because there needs to be that question that every biotech needs to ask themselves. And I can see blueprints, like medical directors are now starting to ask that question, not to say like we figured it out. I mean, I would love to say we did, but we haven't. But it's got us down the right path of now having those very difficult conversations.
That's awesome. What is the industry starting to do better? And who are the innovators, maybe best in class? Anybody?
Amgen.
Thank you for saying that. No, thank you very much for saying that. Look, I mean, I feel, like I said early on in my intro, we've been on this journey for a long time. I think we were always very conscientious of addressing this. And in that case, I do think we're best, and I think we've been a real good innovator. We're very much aligned with pharma, the industry body, in creating some of the wording that eventually came out in terms of how to address clinical trial diversity. I think that the innovators who are taking the time and resources and putting their monies where their mouths are those who are really those who are really the ones we should be looking up to. And I'm very proud to say that Amgen, we are one of them. I think that we have made a lot of good strides. I think that when I look at some of the work that we've done and some of the work that we will be doing with workforce development, clinical trials, for example, we have a new first clinical trial in African American looking at Lp(a), lipoprotein A. This is the first of its kind in collaboration with Morehouse. We've just not seen that. And these are some of the things that I think we're ahead of the game a little bit there. So thank you for saying that. But I do think that as a whole, the industry has moved forward. I think that we are moving in the right direction. There's still work to be done. And I'm sorry if I'm getting into the next question, but I do think that the intention is there. We're seeing progress. This is not going to happen and change overnight, especially knowing some of the historical, that you mentioned, issues that have happened to get us to this place. So it will take time. It's a journey, but I think we're all going in the right direction.
And just
Well, I think that you would agree social media has done a really great job.
Yeah, I was going to say two things. One, just piggybacking off of that, I think working with medical schools like HBCUs that have been doing this for decades, right? Have already been reaching out to the community, finding ways to integrate and making sure that pharmaceutical companies have access to a patient population that maybe hasn't been accessible before because of a long history of mistrust, rightfully so.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think HBCUs are a huge way to go in terms of working with them. So I love that you're working with Morehouse School of Medicine. But obviously I'm a little biased. I think about social media a lot. I'm on it every single day. I was born in 1995 and I call myself a zillennial. It's like a millennial plus a Gen Z. But the one thing about being a zillennial is that we love social media. I grew up with it. It's my second thing basically. And 1 in 10 people actually get their healthcare information from online already. And especially if you think about disease that maybe you've never heard about before, what's the first thing you're going to do?
Google.
You're going to Google it. And then maybe the next thing you're going to do is find a community around it, right? So you go to Instagram, or now a lot of younger people go to TikTok to be able to search things, to hear personal experiences from people. How are they dealing with something? And that goes again for clinical trials as well. And so I've seen a lot of people using places like TikTok to talk about their experiences with specific clinical trials that they're in, or drugs that they're taking, or new innovative medications. And so I think not underselling the value of social media today in the way that people are using it more and more in order not just to find information online, but to connect with other people that are going through similar things that they maybe don't know about.
Right.
So that's really huge, especially for very rare diseases, right? Where maybe
There's like Facebook groups
Exactly.
for everything, just about
Absolutely. And
even
so,
if you're 1 in like 10.
Yep, exactly. And so my suggestion is always, are you looking at those groups online? Are you getting integrated into those communities? Do you have someone that is that point person that is talking with other people, gathering them, wanting to feel community? And we talked about this before, but community and trust is the key pillars of everything that we're doing here.
Key to his point, I really pay attention to, I'm the outreach director. So if I have a study that I'm recruiting for HIV, or maybe it is asthma and it is specific to a diverse group, I actually do use social media for recruitment. So it's very, very vital. But I think it's important the question that you asked, where are the innovators? What does that look like? And to me, if you're in a team, everyone has to be an innovator. Everyone has to have a stake in the game of making sure that if it's a pass, that they pass it the right way. If you have a person that dunks the best, you make sure they get that ball when it's needed. So I think all of us are innovators. I think all of us have to keep these conversations going. And I think making sure, again, that we utilize diverse opportunities to put everyone in the room to make sure that we're reaching the audience where they are, where they're looking for information on this. If it is an indication that African Americans have most of, going into the community to make sure that they understand, hey, you don't have to fear a clinical trial based on historical information. I think everyone understands the Tuskegee study, and I think a lot of people fear this. And, making sure that they understand that it's something that is important, making sure that we reach them where we are, making sure that we have like-minded or people that look like them in that site where they're going for the studies. I think those are the innovative ways that will change clinical trials, and we'll have larger groups of diverse people included.
What is the industry still getting wrong?
Quite a few things. So I'll start with the FDA guidance, because I know we talked about this. Sorry, maybe I should be projecting differently given I work in the industry, but we should be real. We should be real about what's happening, right? So with the FDA guidance, like you said, Panda, it is a guidance, which means that there are no solid repercussions for an organization who doesn't do this. And what I mean by that is organizations have an out. You can apply for a waiver to your diversity template. And in order to do that, a biotech or a pharma organization has to demonstrate that the epidemiology of the disease state makes it impractical for the organization to execute on the diversity plan. And if we go off of what I said earlier, off of if your epidemiology is skewed from the beginning, then every single organization can apply for this thing and you don't have to do it, which brings us back to square one and we get nowhere. So this is still an afterthought. There's a reason why the FDA guidance starts at phase 3. Phase 3 are the largest trials that happen when you're in the clinical trial design frame. And it's always this thought of, let me get my clinical trial design together and then I will think about diversity. It's not, how can I ensure that representation is a core part of my safety studies that I do. It's a core part of my phase 1, my phase 2, and then as I'm getting into phase 3, I can then expand upon the things to ensure that the representation is in line with the epidemiology. But that afterthought mindset is very hard to shift because our entire industry as a system has been built on thinking about people of color and marginalized communities as the other, as the thing that you think about after you're done doing the profitability piece, not realizing that if you want to make a business case for this, people of color, like this entire community is your profitability. Like you get to benefit from this if you were to include us in the conversation from the beginning and not once you've gotten to the end.
Maybe if I can also add in on that, I think where the industry is still not getting it right is we're a bit stagnant in terms of clinical trial sites.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're still very heavily reliant on the large, prestigious institutions, right? Where you may, but you probably may not find the diversity that you're looking for. I think we also are still very much of a mindset of, you know, the trials must come to us, instead of us taking the trials to the communities, like we've all spoken about. We know what's going to encourage being human, being humble, having the humility and being willing to actually listen, right? You know, when you bring the trials into the communities, that means you need to understand where they work, where they play, where they pray, how they interact, and, you know, not just push our own agenda. So I think, you know, over and above the guidance piece or the guidelines piece, I still think that we still have a lot more to do in terms of how we think about trial sites. And I'll just say at Amgen, you know, we're going to talk about maybe workforce development. One of the things I'm very proud of is the work that we've been doing with partnering with the Robert Wynn Awards, with Novartis and other partners with Beacon of Hope, really trying to address exactly this, creating capabilities for trial sites, but more importantly, getting our new investigators of the future ready and equipped to be able to conduct clinical trials in the communities where people look like them, talk like them, think like them, and pray like them.
If I can add to site selection, that's very key, especially when you are establishing a campaign for recruitment. The more sites that you have, again, in those areas will really make a difference in how you're looking for.
Yeah.
So that's very, very key.
And just one thing to add to, for me, I think about diversity. What does diversity mean? Not just racial diversity, but then going into the LGBTQ community as well, where there's a huge legacy of distrust there from everything from how HIV/AIDS used to be called GRID, gay-related immunodeficiency. There's a huge history of mistrust in terms of language too, understanding people's different languages, making sure that things are written in different languages. Most on social media, most information that's medical information is all in English, 90% of things.
Yeah.
And so misinformation spreads in communities, especially when it comes to clinical trials and rare diseases, when there's not common information out there. And then also making sure that SDOH, social determinants of health, is always thought about. I don't think we actually heard that word today yet, but really important to think about. And I think we've been skirting around it, but all the things we were saying, where you work, you play, you pray, all that kind of stuff, impacts. We've talked about food deserts. Understanding all those different metrics need to be going into clinical trials so that you understand communities beyond just racial demographics, beyond the identities we choose to identify with, but actually understanding the full spectrum of things that may prevent people from getting the care they need.
Can we address efforts in diversity and workforce development? So Panda has already started to tell us about that. So
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned that we have, in the last, I would say, a year and a half, you know, made some really important connections and partnerships, first with Novartis and other partners, Beacon of Hope. And there that's, you know, we're looking at partnering with at least 10 HBCUs to really help create the new trialists of the future. We've also done some work with the Robert Wynn Award, where we have with the beacon of hope is more around the capabilities, creating clinical trial site capabilities. And with the Robert Wynne Award is really around making sure that we're creating and preparing new investigators of the future, and partnering with HBCUs, but also just being very intentional about wanting to make an impact, because no one company or no one institution is going to be able to address this and change this overnight. And I feel like the partnerships that we're looking at as an industry, and even outside of our industry, we need to continue to look for better partnerships, because we need a better pipeline. I, as a physician, if I'm treating someone, I know I will connect differently, not just because of the color of my skin, but just culturally, right? And if it's going to be talking about a topic like clinical trials, which is so baggaged with so much historical regrets, and at the same time, even if you are wanting to get into a clinical trial right now, where do you start? How do you navigate? What do you ask your doctor? Like, what do you say to your caregivers at home? There's so much. So if you're able to have those conversations, and you have an ability to sit with a physician who is culturally sensitive and compassionate and has the humility, it makes such a difference. And I think it's up to us to be able to be providing those resources to create those investigators and clinical trialists of the future.
I'm hearing you talk a lot about, there's this like key gap of how are we educating both around like accessibility and the avenues that are open for individuals to come into the life sciences, irrespective of like which career path you choose, but also around clinical trials. And this is tangentially related to the question you asked. I was talking to Heather and Fatima at the beginning of this, of how there is such an opportunity for the industry to come together, the partnerships that can be built to create a cohesive educational campaign, to not have each company reinvent the wheel in their own little silos, which is what's happening right now. Yep. But how do you join your forces, your resources, your bandwidth, your people, all of it, and then make movement together? You're going to get so much farther if you do it together, as opposed to each one of us trying to do it alone. And it relates to also what you mentioned about each one of us being innovators. Why is it that you're innovating alone and then innovating the same exact thing over and over again? Same piece of like, how many of these conferences have we been at where we've talked about all the things and we acknowledge the problems and the gaps and it's great and you leave here motivated, and then what? Like, who's doing the stuff? But it brings up all of the things that you just said, just like connected a lot of those dots for me in my head.
Anyone else want to chime in on that?
Well, I just think with the workforce, us really, it trickles down of trust, and as we all said, I think I'll probably be repeating it, education. And I think also too, like, again, I'm looking at this from a lens of recruitment, marketing, making sure we're having, does my image look correct? Does it fit the piece of diversity? Is my messaging right? Should I say it a particular way to entice, not even entice, but to bring someone more, maybe I should look at a clinical trial. But to me, when it comes to that workforce of once you arrive there at that site and you've joined a clinical trial, do I have someone that I can talk to? Yeah. That's educating it. Maybe it's more education on how we train our medical field of being able to teach people what clinical trials is and how important it is and how detrimental it is if we don't have everyone represented in the research. So I think that's the key of educating how we train our physicians and our medical workforce.
Anyone have any last thoughts?
I think the last thing that I'll say is really about what we've talked about a lot, which is trust. I think medicine, it hinges on trust, right? Between the patient, the provider in all senses of the word, all the people that are part of the team. And so I think as we're talking about all of this, remembering that legacy, the history that's behind it, recognizing that, I think that's how we gain trust with individuals, just overall with patients. When I think about my own platform, I have a whole series of videos called Hidden Medical History. And half the time when I'm telling these horrible stories, I'm really worried that I'm gonna be pushing people away from medicine. But I realize in the comments, people are saying the opposite. They're saying, I appreciate you letting me know this so I know what to look out for when I go to the doctor. Not that I'm glad you told me this so I don't go to the doctor. And I think it's this understanding that we all want information that's gonna better our own health. Once we give that to people, we start to build bridges and we start to form just like literal bridges over chasms that have existed for a long time.
Thank you guys so much. This has been
Yeah.
fabulous.
Thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, wasn't that a great panel, everyone? You know, just some quick thoughts that I wanted to bring to the forefront. If this panel didn't show me anything else, it showed me that people care. You know, we can talk all day about the world is going to hell in a handbasket, but it's days like today that we get a chance to see some of the leading people in healthcare and in pharma talk about how they care and the things that they're doing to really signify that change in their care. So I just want to give a round of applause to everyone that's been here today. One specific sentence that I just want to share, one last sentence that I want to share before we move on, is that one of the panelists said, this does not happen overnight and change doesn't happen in an instant. That statement got me excited. Why? Because that means they have a commitment for the long term. This is not just coming in and saying, okay, I'm going to do a little something here, maybe a little something there. No, they are dedicated. And Ponda said that. So I just want to give a round of applause for Amgen for really making the dedication in this space to really have, to really put the money where their mouth is and really be in the community in so many different facets. So that statement got me just so excited for the rest of the day. Now, I won't be the last thing that's going to hold you up from lunch. We've got lunch provided. I already heard people's stomachs growling over there, so I know this section is ready to eat. So we have lunch provided in this room right over here to my left, your right. Feel free to sit anywhere in here. There's also space on the carpet areas over there for you to eat and sit down. But as of now, we're dismissed for lunch. We'll come back at 1 for our next fireside chat. Thank you.